Thank you both for joining me here today. It's a beautiful Southern Nevada afternoon. Marcy, why do we need the Southern Nevada Economic Development Conservation Act?
Well, I would say, Randy, we need it for the reason you just introduced, is Las Vegas is a beautiful place to live. We have a high quality of life. We have a lot of recreation and economic opportunities. And so we have a growing population. And this bill is about providing additional land to service that growing population, both in terms of development, economic development opportunities, and to include additional conservation lands that allow for conservation of native species here in Southern Nevada, and also provide landscapes like this for recreation purposes as well.
Commissioner, for the rest of this discussion, we love acronyms in government, so I'm going to call this SNEDCA for the rest of this discussion, if that's okay. How does SNEDCA balance basically the three elements here, which are growth, conservation, and recreation?
Sure. I mean, one of the hardest of the bills is expanding what's called the disposal area. That is sort of the ring around the valley that allows development to occur on BLM lands. And so the idea is that as we continue to make some expansions within the urban core, but also along I-15, both north and south of town, that we make sure that we designate additional areas, not only as wilderness, but as areas of critical environmental concern, to account for the fact that we continue that growth. So I think we are in one bill really making a compromise between some important conservation goals and some important goals when it comes to allowing for more development.
You just introduced another acronym, Marcy, area of critical environmental concern, ACEC. Marcy, what does that mean, and what does it mean for this area where we are here?
An area of critical environmental concern is a Bureau of Land Management designation that's provided to landscapes that deserve conservation status and protection, particularly for sensitive habitats and species. And so our backdrop here today is a proposed area of critical environmental concern known as Bird Springs Valley. And it represents just under 40,000 acres to be put in conservation status in the bill. This area is known for having excellent desert tortoise habitat, which is a federally listed species on the federal endangered species list. It also has a healthy population of burrowing owl, which are protected on the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. And then it also has a Joshua tree, which, as we know, is an iconic species for the Mojave. So this just represents an excellent Mojave landscape that deserves protection, and that's why we're proposing to include it in the bill.
Another mouthful is the Multiple Species Habitat Conservation Plan, and you mentioned our good friend Mojave Max and all his little desert tortoise friends. 78 species are covered under that. How will SNEDCA incorporate or work alongside the Multiple Species Act?
Well, so for the development that occurs in Southern Nevada, it will impact habitat for species like desert tortoise. And so, as Commissioner Jones was mentioning, we have an obligation to offset those impacts, both just a moral commitment that Clark County has, and then also under the law, under the Federal Endangered Species Act. And so in order to develop that habitat, we have to prepare a habitat conservation plan. And so the Multiple Species Habitat Conservation Plan is the component that matches the permit that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will give us for development. So this area that we're in here would be added to the conservation portfolio of the Multiple Species Habitat Conservation Plan. It would serve as mitigation, so again, offsetting impacts. So there are areas for development that are offset by areas of conservation like here in Bird Springs Valley. And so the bill would propose to give us mitigation credit for these areas and then to extend the MSHCP for another 50 years.
Commissioner, obviously a lot of the work was done and approved by the Board of County Commissioners about 6 months or so before you took office in January of this year. But obviously a place very near and dear to your heart is the Red Rock National Conservation Area. How will this bill affect that area?
Sure. So there are a couple of parcels right now that are up on the top of Blue Diamond Hill that are designated for disposal or for potential development. And so part of this bill is to remove those parcels from the disposal boundary from possible development. And so it'll create some additional protections up on top of the hill. In addition to that, there are some discussions amongst the congressional delegation about potential expansion. And also, I will say, in the original proposal, there were some additional lands that are near Red Rock NCA that were proposed for expansion, but in discussions with commissioners and with the conservation community, we did remove those, and so hopefully that will keep them from development.
Okay, and I don't know if people could hear, we could just hear some OHVs, some off-highway vehicles, which are very much ingrained in Southern Nevada's lifestyle for many, many people. How will this affect people in their four-wheel drives, on their dirt bikes, things like that?
Sure, so there are already places within Clark County that are designated for off-highway vehicles. This bill provides some additional parameters for where off-highway vehicle use can occur. There are some of those areas that are also overlay with critical environmental species, and so we're trying to balance the interest there, but also create some additional areas for off-highway vehicles. And the idea really is to allow for recreationists to use different parcels while maintaining conservation areas that are around there.
Marcy, another part of this bill allows for a safety complex up on Mount Charleston. What does this mean? What will that do?
Well, we learned a lot in the Carpenter 1 fire about our readiness on the mountain and to deal with things like wildfire, which unfortunately we're going to see a lot more of as a result of things like climate change, increased temperatures, increased drought. And so one of the things we learned is that we weren't well situated in terms of being able to provide a command center at the base of the mountain where all of the different players, Clark County Fire Department, Nevada Division of Forestry, Highway Patrol, Metro, all the first responders could have a joint response center. And then we also have some of our fire services we have a fire station up on the hill, and the fire was in between the fire station and the bottom of the hill, which presented some challenges. So what we're seeking in the legislation is to provide a parcel at the base of Mount Charleston off Kyle Canyon Road that would allow for a coordinated complex where all of these agencies will have facilities, they can have their equipment, and there can be a place to assemble and provide coordinated response. Very important.
So much of this work, Commissioner, has been done certainly not in a bubble, and there's been dozens of organizations, jurisdictions that have been at the table, including the Mwapa Band of Paiute Tribe. Tell me about how this is going to affect those folks there.
Sure. So the tribe has been interested in acquiring additional lands that they believe are sacred to their community for a long time, and this will expand that by tens of thousands of acres. And give them not only additional lands, but opportunities for development. The tribe has developed solar resources already, and I think this will give them opportunities for additional expansion.
And Marcy, obviously we haven't talked too much about developers that are obviously Clark County continues to grow. How will this affect land development in Clark County and the environs?
So we've had interest by developers in having additional lands made available for development and disposal. And so even though it looks like there's a ton of land in Southern Nevada, 90% of it is administered by a federal land management agency. And that's not a bad thing. It's just a condition that we find ourselves here in Southern Nevada. And so there's typically a sense of scarcity that happens based on how much land is available for development. And so there are acres available in the current Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act disposal boundary. So that was the ring around the valley that Commissioner Jones was speaking of. But what we're finding, what we're hearing back from developers is that those parcels may not be in the right locations, in the right acreage to accommodate the types of projects that they want to build. And so we have to take that into consideration. And so that's why we are seeking some additional acres to be added to the Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act disposal boundary. And so business and industry from the development standpoint, they're very interested in this. They've been great about supporting the conservation component of the bill, and they're very interested in seeing these additional acres made available. I think it will also help with some of our land affordability issues as well. So the more land the more scarce that land becomes, the higher the price and the value. And so this will provide a little bit of a relief valve with regard to land values.
Commissioner, as we sit here taping this in the middle of November, what's next for SNEDCA?
Well, we are working with our congressional delegation right now. I think they are optimistic that in the next month or two that a draft bill will be up before Congress, and we'll continue to interface with them to make sure that they have any information they need from us at the county, and we will be optimistic that next year it will move through Congress.
Commissioner, as we just mentioned, there have been dozens of organizations that have been involved, and certainly many of the conservation organizations have been right at the forefront. What type of response have you been getting from those types of groups?
Sure. Like I said, we've had conservation groups at the table from day one of this process, and have really been influenced by them in making sure that we create the right balance. And so there have been definitely some organizations that have expressed some concerns, and we are working with them to address those concerns every day. And I think we will continue to be effective in making sure that this bill does not upset the critical balance that we have when it comes to conservation in Southern Nevada.
Thank you both, and I think we'll continue this discussion in 2020 as the next steps come along.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Randy.